Have you ever stopped to think about the hidden work behind something as basic as getting water? For millions, it's just not as simple as turning on the tap. Today, we're doing a deep dive into this really powerful research article. It uncovers the unseen burden of water collection, specifically in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this isn't just numbers, it's about lives shaped by this daily, often grueling task.
Right, and our goal here is to really pull out the key insights from this analysis. It covers 24 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. We want to focus on who exactly is carrying this load, how long it takes them, and what the real costs are, the ones that often get overlooked. The findings we'll discuss come from a study using data from the Demographic Health Survey, that's the DHS, and the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, MICS, collected between 2005 and 2012.
And the study sets a benchmark, right? It defines long water collection times as anything over 30 minutes. That's often seen as like the threshold for basic access. But here's where it gets really interesting. The impact goes way beyond just the time spent walking.
Exactly, it ripples outwards.
So let's unpack this. The sheer scale, the numbers from this study, they're honestly staggering. Across those 24 countries, the estimate is something like 13.5 million adult women and 3.36 million children were collecting water for households where that round trip took more than half an hour.
Yeah, 13.54 million women, 3.36 million kids. It really highlights the scale and how they got those numbers. The researchers combined data from those big national surveys, DHS and MICS, with population estimates. It's important to remember what those surveys asked, though. They focused on things like the main water source, where it is, how long it takes to go, get the water, and come back. Crucially, who usually does the fetching? And they broke that down by age under 15 or 15 plus and by sex.
So what does that actually mean day to day? It means a huge number of people are spending a significant amount of their time every single day just on this one vital chore, time that could be spent, well, elsewhere.
Which leads us to the big question. Who is carrying this load? How does it break down? And if you look at the bigger picture from the study, it's incredibly clear. Adult women, they were consistently the main water collectors in every single one of the 24 countries studied. The percentage of households relying on women for these long trips, over 30 minutes, ranged from about 46% in Liberia up to 90% in Cote d'Ivoire.
Wow, 46 to 90%. That's a massive range. But the trend is just undeniable. And just to give you a sense of the absolute numbers involved, 4 countries had over 1 million households where an adult woman was the primary collector for these long trips. Ethiopia was huge, 4.7 million households. Nigeria, 2.9 million. Mozambique, 1.5 million. And Malawi, 1.1 million.
It's enormous. And the study looked at gender ratios, too. Female collectors versus male collectors. For adults, every country had a ratio above 1. So women always carried more of the burden than men. But get this, 7 countries had gender ratios over 10, meaning 10 times more women than men doing this. Guinea was extreme, almost 54 women for every man collecting water. Cote d'Ivoire, 26. Mali, nearly 20. It really shows a stark imbalance. Though it's worth noting, urban areas generally had smaller ratios, smaller disparities compared to rural areas.
Okay, that's adults. Now let's talk about the children involved. What stood out to you there?
Well, it's definitely not just an adult problem. That's key. Across all the countries, girls were more likely to be the main water collectors than boys. The split was about 62% girls to 38% boys.
62%, so nearly 2/3 of the kids doing this are girls.
Yes, and it's not a small number of households relying on children either. 6 countries had over 100,000 households where kids were the main collectors for trips over 30 minutes. Ethiopia again stood out, over 1.3 million households relying primarily on children. Nigeria, over 1 million too.
And the prevalence, the percentage of households relying on kids, that varied a lot too.
It did. It ranged from a low of about 4% in urban Zimbabwe up to a high of 55%, more than half in urban Niger.
55% urban Niger relying on children.
Wow. Yeah. And just like with adults, they looked at gender ratios for children. In 22 out of the 24 countries, girls were carrying more of this burden than boys. Guinea and Malawi had really high ratios for kids, around 13 and 11 respectively. Interestingly, only Liberia and Niger had child gender ratios at or below 1, meaning boys collected as much, or in some cases maybe more water there.
Okay, so we've established the scale and who's doing the work, overwhelmingly women and girls. Let's dig into the impact. Why does spending, say, 45 minutes fetching water matter so much, beyond just, the time itself?
Well, the health impacts are pretty significant and often chronic. Carrying heavy water containers, often 20 liters or more, over long distances, day after day, it takes a toll. It can lead to fatigue, serious musculoskeletal damage, back problems, neck problems, even early arthritis. One study they cited in South Africa found 69% of people transporting water reported spinal pain. 69%. And then there are infectious disease risks, things like schistosomiasis from contact with contaminated water sources during collection. Some studies specifically looking at children found a direct link. More water collection trips per day meant worse health outcomes.
And this is where it gets really striking for me, the impact on young children's health. The study mentioned findings like just a 5-minute decrease in water collection time was linked to a 14% drop in diarrhea risk for kids under 5, and higher body weight scores. Cut the time by 15 minutes. A 41% drop in diarrhea risk. 31%, that's huge. It's comparable to the impact of things like sanitation programs or hand washing campaigns or water disinfection.
It absolutely is. It shows how fundamental, how impactful just reducing that travel time can be for basic health. But then you also have to ask, what about the opportunity costs? What else are people not doing because they're spending hours fetching water? For women, it's less time for rest, which is critical, less time interacting with their children, less time for education, for community involvement, or for any kind of income-generating activity. One study estimated that shorter collection times could mean almost 50 minutes more rest per day for women. Think about that. And there's a darker side to the increased risk of sexual violence. When women and girls have to travel long distances, sometimes in isolated areas, often early morning or late evening.
And for children, the impact on schooling is it's heartbreaking. You hear about kids spending, on average, maybe 19-20 hours a week on domestic chores, and water collection often takes the biggest chunk of that. It means they might leave school early. Or they're just exhausted in class, finding it hard to concentrate. In some situations, older kids, especially girls, get pulled out of school entirely, either to fetch water themselves or to look after younger siblings while their mothers fetch water. Girls in Ethiopia specifically talked about how it limited their chances, their ability to actually succeed in school. The study even found kids transporting water or other goods just trying to pay their school fees. And up to a third of kids in Ghana reported being late for school specifically because they had to collect water first.
And what's fascinating and maybe counterintuitive for some listeners is that having an improved water source doesn't automatically solve this travel time problem. Improved doesn't always mean on the premises or even nearby. Take Ghana, for example. The study noted 87% of the population used an improved source. Sounds good, right? But 94% of rural residents and 58% of urban households still had to travel off-site to collect that water.
94% in rural Ghana, even with an improved source.
Exactly. Same story in Gambia. 90% reported improved water supply, but 88% of rural people and 45% of urban people still had to leave home to get it. It really drives home that crucial difference between access to a safe source and proximity, actually having it close enough to not impose this huge time burden.
So, okay, this study paints a really detailed picture, but like all research, it has its limitations, right? What did the authors point out?
Yeah, they were clear about that. A key limitation is that these big surveys usually don't capture how many trips a household makes per day. And that can change a lot, depending on season, family size, water use. They also don't typically break down the travel time into, say, time spent walking versus time spent waiting in line at the water point, which can sometimes be significant. There was some early research suggesting self-reported times could be a bit inaccurate, but more recent studies seem to show a better correlation with observed times. Still, capturing all the nuances of this labor, it remains really challenging to do perfectly with these kinds of large-scale surveys.
Right, and it also sounds like the surveys tell us who collects the water, but maybe not always the complex why. What about the social dynamics behind these patterns?
That's another gap the study acknowledges. It doesn't fully delve into the complex social reasons why it's usually women and girls. It does suggest some potential factors, though. Things like women's political empowerment, there's some evidence that having female local leaders might actually lead to better investments in water infrastructure. And also, potentially societal views about carrying goods, viewing it as a lower status activity, perhaps more suited for females in some cultural contexts. Understanding those deeper social norms and power dynamics is really critical if you want to design interventions that are truly sustainable and equitable.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive has really, I think, laid bare just how immense and how disproportionate the burden of water collection is, especially on women and children in Sub-Saharan Africa. It's clearly not just an inconvenience, it's a major barrier, a barrier to health, to education, to safety, to economic opportunity. It touches everything.
Absolutely. And what's really important coming out of this research is the call from the authors. They argue strongly that water accessibility, meaning proximity and water collection by children, and these gender ratios we've discussed,
These should be key indicators. They should be used to actually measure progress in the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector, the WAH sector. We need to track these things specifically. And there's a clear need for better data, more detailed data, and longitudinal studies that follow households over time to really grasp the full ongoing impact.
And for you, our listener, here's maybe a final thought to mull over. Despite everything we've talked about, the clear health impacts, the time costs, the links to education and safety, the major global burden of disease reports, they currently do not include water transport as a specific risk factor in their analyses. So what does it mean when this profound daily labor with such obvious consequences isn't formally counted as a health risk? Especially, as populations grow and water scarcity potentially gets worse in many parts of Sub-Saharan Africa. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other critical daily burdens might be overlooked in our standard ways of measuring health and